of the things as Black and brown leaders that we don't get a chance to do is be face to face in mass.
So our national convening is an opportunity for charter leaders of color from across the country to come together and see each other face to face, to be able to sit in a room together, to be able to strategize together, to understand what other leaders are doing from other states. The need for the Charter Collaborative was born out of a void in the charter ecosystem where there are no supports for charter school leaders of color. Zero.
So across the last few days, we convened over 120 charter school leaders of color and stakeholders of color to engage in conversations around what's happening in our schools and our communities and how we can collectively move the work forward in a way where everyone wins.
So when we talk about grit and resilience, I can tell you all about that because that's what's gotten me where I am today. And thank you.
In these conversations around school choice and charter schools, they are often dominated by white-led charter management organizations that surprisingly only represent 30% of the charter sector.
We need to be in charge of this narrative, right? I think we know across the country, everywhere, that the access to equity has been limited at best.
What I envision for students of color in education is that the conversation of leaders of color will move from the object of the conversation to the subject of the conversation. Because once you're the subject, you determine the object. And so that's what I see as the future of students of color 50 years from now.
For people who are interested in supporting the work of National Charter Collaborative and thus all of the single site and small networks of schools led by folks of color across the country, we invite you to visit our website, to engage with us on social media, to join us in our advocacy campaign efforts. We're just inviting communities to participate in this because, again, if we want to go alone, we can go fast. But if we want to go far, we must go together.
Good afternoon, and thank you all so much for joining us. That video is from several years ago, but it still holds true, right? Unfortunately, we are not able to gather in person today, but I am more than excited to have us join each other virtually in community. I am Naomi Shelton, the Chief Executive Officer of the National Charter Collaborative. You heard all about the work that we do, but I think today, while we unconference, while we just sit and have conversation and build community, it's important for us to think about the people who paved the way, the folks who open their doors during the middle of a pandemic, and just raise a glass to the people that make it all possible. So today we had some amazing conversations, and I am more than happy to pass the baton to my colleagues. Ray Ankrum, which we all know from 8 Black Hands, is going to so generously moderate today's conversation with our new school leaders. We have a new charter school leader, Atasha James of Legend Charter School in Maryland, and Jeff and Christy from Indianapolis with Promise Prep. I am going to take a step back and relax so I can hear all about the great work that is happening. Ray, you ready to unconference?
Of course, of course. Thank you for having me. I appreciate you, sis. And yeah, you're doing amazing work, and I'm super proud of you.
Thank you. You sound so official.
This is not Sunday night, so.
Well, thank you all so much for joining us, and I will turn it over to you. Thanks so much.
Yeah, thank you so much. All right, so I'm Ray Ankrum, superintendent of Riverhead Charter School located on Long Island, and so I want to kind of jump right into this conversation because we don't have that much time together, and I want to let these amazing leaders share what they're doing in their space. And so I guess the first question, and it's going to be to all of you guys, because individually I'm sure that you have different thoughts, is let's talk about some of the highs and lows of being a school leader today. We'll throw it to you, Jeff.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you, Ray. And thank you, Naomi, for hosting. And Natasha, thank you. And Christy. For me, I think some of the highs is just being able to see how people are dealing with it and dealing with the challenges that we're all facing. I think some of the highlights I have is actually like working with Christy and seeing a genius come out every single day and being able to problem solve complex or small problems consistently, seeing our kids rise to the challenge every single day and just come in with joy. And then lastly, just like people around, like there's just been able to like call people and like, hey, what are your thoughts about this? Hey, what resources do you have? Hey, I don't have a kid that don't have a coat. Do you have any extra at your school? And people just being able to step in. I think some of the lows for us has just been also just like figuring out what does it really mean to move kids in a way that keeps learning joyful yet still rigorous while still moving them to where they need to be and where they deserve to be. And I think right now we have a lot of kids that are in second grade that functionally are academically currently at like the kindergarten level due to the pandemic. And like, how do we nurture their genius yet at the same exact time push them to where they need to be?
That's exciting. Thanks for sharing that. Passing it to you, Atisha. I want to pronounce your name correctly. Please help me here.
No worries. My pleasure. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Natasha James, CEO of Legends Charter School located in Atlanta, Maryland, Prince George's County. Certainly the high for me after a 2-year-long application process, purchasing a building that construction was not impacted by COVID, just to open up our doors, be it virtually, to serve 500 beautiful students and do it well and see the strength and determination of our team, our wonderful community, and push through. Even though we were virtual in our first year, we managed to create a sense of belonging and community while folks were home isolated. Parents bonded over this experience. Our staff absolutely bonded. And at the end of the year, students left academically better off than when the year started. And more importantly, the students felt loved and joy even during that global pandemic. So cheers to our team at Legends Charter School and Equity Now for all the work and the lift that went into opening those doors. Some of the lows have also been not being able to hear joyful noise in a building that we did so much to get open, and it felt like such empty work. And that was really hard the first few weeks. I was really grateful when we could open even part-time on a virtual basis to feel and occupy our building with the laughter in the presence of students.
Yeah, that's dope. Thanks for sharing. And so, Christy, we're not going to have you answer the same question because you and Jeff are at the same schools. But my question to you is, what keeps you up late at night with regards to our babies?
What keeps me up late at night? We have a high population of EL learners. And so those students are held to the same expectation to meet grade level standards, but have the language barrier. So clearly it makes it more of a challenge for them to be able to meet those grade level standards. And so just trying to figure out ways in which I can help make it easier, ways in which we can support them as they learn the language at the same time as having to be able to master those grade level standards. That's what keeps me up late at night.
So just so you guys know, I'm being micromanaged from afar, right? So like I'm receiving these messages about, hey, loosen up. Hey, this, hey, that, right? So like I'm really not running the show, even though I'm running the show. So just so you guys know, right? And so COVID just hit us, right? And so like, how did you guys kind of navigate through that experience with your scholars? Atasha, we'll start with you.
Navigating through COVID has been something that any educator who's had to do it deserves a frequent punch card at whatever spirit or liquor wine store is near their neighborhood. Because there's nothing that could have prepared you for this, period. And so when you think about all of the personalized fears, managing that is difficult because everyone has their reason for either getting vaccinated, not getting vaccinated, being an educator, providing a service for a community while dealing with your own house during this pandemic has really opened up the traditional silo of what it means to leave your air quote life at home when you're actually teaching from your living room with your own children running in the background and trying to manage that all. And so that was particularly challenging, and there was no right way to do it. It was only to root it in love and understanding, and have an extra dose of patience and understanding for all parties involved during that time period. You were muted, Ray.
Oh man, it wasn't feedback coming from me. Jeff, same question.
I think I'll add to what Tasha said. I think I'll go back to like a really dope thing that we saw. It was just like how during COVID, like how people stepped up. Like we had a point in time where we were down several faculty members, but we had instructional assistants that really just rose to the occasion and provided some pretty strong instruction for a long period of time. I think the other thing I go back to is like working with a team that everyone's trying to problem solve, launching the school with minimal resources and seeing like the creativity that comes out of that during COVID has been like a huge like gift and blessing. I think last but not least, and I think one thing we did, and just like last night was a highlight, like this joy piece is extremely important right now. Christy speaks about this like a lot when we talk about like thinking about like how the brain works and how it works with our kids, and make sure that they're excited to want to learn how to read so that they can continuously become better readers. But like really providing the joy. And one thing that we've committed to and is led by Christy is like a once a month family event in person, having the people come with, making it as safe as possible. And last night we had, close to 40+% of our families here doing a learning carnival. And I think for me, that shows that there's a thirst of people wanting to, put in work around this. And COVID has oddly created an opportunity for us to figure out how to be creative and for us to actually figure out how to partnership. Ain't no turning back right now. To solve stuff for our Black and brown babies, we got to work together, especially us Black folks more than anything. So I think that's what's been pushing me around the pandemic. And we've been able to learn from the Dr. Leverts of the world to partner with Dave McGuire, who's right down the street, and Rick Anderson and some other people. So I just want to be like, that's it, man. Pandemic proved to me that Black folks working together and brown folks working together is essential. And lastly, we're some creative people, man.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you for sharing that. And so, Christy, coming right to you, he talked about the fact that you guys are able to bring parents out, right? And that's one of the unique things that I think that single site charter schools are able to do better than anybody else, right? And so, Christy, what's the secret sauce? Like, how are you able to get such a diverse core of parents to come out and navigate through spaces even when COVID is happening? Like, what are you doing?
Making it fun. So we hyped it up. Carnival style family workshop. Come play some games, win some prizes, eat some pizza. Like, just make it simple and hype it up to make it sound like it's going to be a lot of fun. And in fact, it really was a lot of fun. So really giving parents what they want, not expecting them to come into a building, sit and be talked at, letting them be able to interact and engage with their students. Like I mentioned before, we have a high population of EL learners. So many of our parents are learning English as well. And so with them being able to engage in those activities around literacy and numeracy with their students last night, it was a way for us to help them be able to learn the content and be able to help their student at home as well. So like Jeff said, one of our adult share values is joy and humor. And so I feel like that's the secret sauce.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. So Tasha, coming right to you, right? Because like you have a different core of parents. You're in PG County, parents are a little bit more affluent. From my perspective and from my read, right? So like, how are you getting parents involved? Because I think parent engagement is key to any school, regardless of wherever you are at being successful. So what are you doing?
Right. So first, there is a continuum of financial disparity in Prince George's County. And so with us being one of only 11 charter schools in the county, our parents go out of their way to actively select Legends Charter School, and they hold us accountable to delivering on that promise. We have a director of family and community engagement because we want our teachers to be able to focus on teaching and learning. And so all of the fun things, all of the non-instructional activities that come out of our come out of our school are led by a single person in our Legends parent organization. And so that joy and that fun is there. We're planning our skating parties. We have, you name it, it's no day of the week that we're not celebrating something, that the kids aren't coming to school dressing up to make the learning fun, but also to allow the students to understand that we can chew and walk at the same time, and that learning in the absence of fun, that doesn't really work long term. But more importantly, one of the things that Legend stands out on is our financial education component. And one of our accountability goals is to leverage our financial education so that our students open up stock accounts. In our first year, 30% of our families opened up stock accounts. Our kids begin getting that financial education in kindergarten. And so you'll hear students talk about investing in companies that they utilize at home very much frequently. And so one of the ways that we get parents involved is obviously kids can't open up those custodial accounts on their own. And so our parents also participate in a heavy, heavy, heavy financial education of their own. And that unifies that discourse that occurs at home. And so when we eventually get our kids and parents together at the point where they're ready to open up those investment accounts, we have then created a winning recipe, because the students are saying, look, Mr. DeVos said, Mom, why are you doing this? Why are you not using your cash and not using your card? Mom, you drink Starbucks a lot. Do you own it? You know, and those conversations bring parents to the table in a way to say, what are you teaching my student? What is going on? Our humanities curriculum is centered in kids' identity. We're unapologetically Black. And so the parents are hearing that it's centered in who they are and where they're from. And the parents are saying to us, we never talked about these kind of topics until we were well into middle and high school. But it's very important for us to lay it on the table in the sense of really educating the whole child. And we know that that's not possible without installing and making sure the students know who they are, where they're from. And the term legends is actually what we use to speak life onto our students. They're literally a legend in the sense of who they are and what they'll be. And we tell the kids as often as possible, you are our future. And that's why we're so invested in making sure you can serve your community and serve your country. And so whatever it takes for us, for the kids to understand that this is genuinely rooted in them, it's easy for the kids and parents to willingly come and participate in all the things.
Yeah, that's dope. Thanks for sharing that. Right. And so, Christy, matter of fact, no, Jeff, we're coming to you, bro. Everything can't be good, right? Something's got to be bad because it's an internal growth plan in terms of like how we approach this work. And so, what are your areas of growth in terms of like what you guys are seeing in Indy and what you guys can do better?
Yeah, man, I think that's straightforward. It's just figuring out what's sustainability look like. You know, being a slow growth school that's growing during a pandemic is something that we have to just be conscious and think about. And then figuring out that we're in a pandemic right now. There's a teacher shortage. There's a lot going on, and how do you also, get the best people for your people, which I mean our kids, to ensure to serve that too. It's like a complex thing that we constantly have to dose around. And I think the biggest thing being a single site, that's the worst thing, is that at times we're just caught in the struggle. And even though we're doing good work, it's not good enough to keep our kids don't need to remain in the struggle as well, because we're small. And I think that's like the complex thing that, I deal with every single day, and I try to figure out how to problem solve that. But like, I refuse for our kids to we have to remain in the struggle because we're small, but also have to deal with the brutal reality of our size and what it means for the interim. So that's I think that's the major thing, is how do we actually get the best resources for our kids so that we can move them and not always have to compromise around that, or knowing that we do have to compromise at particular times, but when does that compromise stop? Or what's the quickest way to break that mold in the third wave value that's unconventional? So that's what we're grappling with. Well, I'll say I personally am grappling with this as well. And I think I've got one more piece too. I want to say this too. I think this is important to highlight, especially in our context. We, Chrissy, highlighted that we have a huge ENL population, immigrant population, which is majority made up of Hispanic-speaking families or Spanish-speaking families, but also Haitian Creole families. One thing what we're having is, over the past couple of years in Indies, there's been an increase in the Haitian population. And I'm also a shout out, like my parents come from Haiti as well, but there's been a huge increase over the past like 6 months with students and families that are immigrating from Haiti to South or Central America and then figuring out a way to get here. And I think for me, something else that I'm realizing that's really challenging is that we have this influx of students coming in. My question is, what can we do from a policy standpoint to ensure that funding is coming in to make sure that they're supported and they're not the forgotten group? 70% of our kids are in that ESL population, and they're coming in here hungry, just like every other student wanted to learn. But I think there's inequitable funding that's not coming in to support them so that the infrastructure can be in place so that they can be as successful as possible with their families. And like I mentioned earlier, like families literally are coming through, like they came through some real situations that is extremely traumatic that we may not even be able to communicate to even actually understand what the root cause of it is, because of ESL kids don't get funded at all. So with that reality being out there, my push right now too is the complexity around this. How do we figure out how to not just get money for all kids, because all our kids deserve money, but then also for other kids that are subgroups that really need the extra boost so they can get the right service, so we can course correct things right now before it becomes something that people are complaining about in the future, because people love complaining in the future about things, but don't want to take a step to think about what they can do right now.
Thank you for that. Ms. Christie, is anything you want to add to that?
No, I think Jeff covered everything pretty well.
Yes, he did. All right, thank you for that. All right, so Atasha, coming straight to you. Let's talk about the results, right? Because like we can't, we got to talk about the results. And I'm coming back to Indy in 1 second. So like, how are your students performing? What kind of growth patterns are you seeing like during COVID and now that we're out of COVID and we're like face to face with students or whatever? Like, talk to me about what kind of growth you're seeing from your students.
Yeah, so I want to acknowledge that the pressure of the accountability is real, even in COVID. At the end of the day, we have a charter obligation to fulfill and meet, and nothing has gone according to plan in COVID. Testing students using TRC, being in person, all of those items that we neatly wrote out and beautifully crafted in our charter application, every single item had to be pivoted on. And so that said, we used iReady to take baseline, mid-year, and end-of-year growth markers for our students across math and reading. And so the trends from last year to this, last year, we had a lot of teacher assistants at home helping kids with their work on period. The scores from last year to this year, from home to being in school, have a difference of about 50 to 70 points. And so what we're seeing is that the students may not have actually been performing where they were last year. Now, B, having the students test in school, there's a real big disconnect with what parents thought their student were doing at home versus what is actually occurring in school now. And that's also putting pressure on our school design to leverage a tier 1 support writ large. And that tier 1 support isn't what we traditionally have thought about when it comes to focusing on particular aspects of students' learning. Being out of school for 2 years, the rhythm, cadence, the urgency for both teachers and students has to be reestablished. And that impacts the way that we go about establishing relationships, the rapport. Teachers have been at home for the same amount of time that the students have been home for, and making that connection that will allow for us to build that trust to move forward is something that we have to work on in real time. And so what we're finding is that students' ability to use technology has increased and the digital citizenry is there. But now that we're back in school, what we're trying to figure out is, how do we continue to make those connections? How do we continue to make sure that we can engage parents virtually, despite the fact that we're, air quote, opening up and allowing parents to come back into the space? And so right now it's tweaking out how to balance all of the aspects of the academic demands against the students' reacclimation into schools. And so all of it is pretty rough if we're being quite honest, right? We're talking about making the end of first quarter, and we had to use that largely to review and just reestablish norms in hopes of us being able to go further, faster. But the reality is that the students, in my opinion, have become accustomed to that small setting and learning of wherever they were doing that, whether it was at mom's house, grandma's house, and having somebody over their shoulder to be able to prompt them. And now we're seeing that support be removed. And it's a real issue inside of the classrooms right now.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. That's a lot to unpack. I think my school, just to interject the Riverhead Charter School in here for a second, right? We experienced the total opposite, right? And so our students being in person is extremely helpful in terms of like where they're scoring, like where we're like in terms of our progress monitoring. Us being in person instruction has proved to be better than online instruction for us, right? And we invested a lot of time, and our online program was a good program. However, our kids respond better to being in person, right? And so, Christy, bringing you into the conversation, let's talk about results. What are you seeing?
So this is actually our first year with students. So we do not have the outside of our data that we took at the beginning of the school year. We do not have data like previous grade level data. But as far as results so far, what we are seeing is students came to us without having the language to be able to have conversations and communicate. And what we're seeing now is that their oral language has developed and they are having more conversations about if it's a read aloud, they're able to interact with other students and the teacher in regards to talking about, you know, the story itself. They're coming up with stories of their own. Just their ability and comfortability around communicating. As I keep mentioning, we have 70% EL language learners. So, you know, that silent period for some of them, this is their first experience with formal schooling at all. And so just them being able to communicate effectively around their needs, around the content that they're learning in the classroom. And many of them are starting to read, which is what our goal is, that all of the kindergartners will be reading by December. And so many of them are already reading sight word stuff, repetition, all of those things. However, coming from learning a new language, that's big for us.
Right. Thanks for sharing that. My school is actually 70% ENL as well. So if you guys ever want to come and kick it with us, please feel free to come. What I see from our ENL students, especially in terms of like the parent engagement piece, is that those parents are on it, right?
Mm-hmm.
You call those parents. Hopefully you have folks in your building that are able to translate and get that message across to them if need be, right? There's some different tools that we use in order to make sure that we're translating and providing that kind of equitous environment for all families to be feeling inclusive. But they respond, right? And I'm just like, we call with a concern, and that concern is addressed immediately. If they have concerns, they will address you in those concerns. Where I get Facebook messages in the middle of the night on our Facebook page, like it may be in a different language. I can just copy and paste and put it in Google Translate or whatever, and like get back to them really quick. But they're super responsive, right? And so for them to not have the funding that they should have in terms of like thinking about a language acquisition program, they do the best they can, and they do a really good job. And so, Latasha, to you, what's your biggest ask for the charter sector, right? Thinking about charter schools writ large, like what's your ask from like elected officials, funders, community-based organizations? Like what's your ask?
So, Ray, my ask is twofold, because each state has the power to either make an incredible charter law or not. And where I'm working and operating in Maryland is the worst charter law in the country. And so my first ask is to anybody listening to please, please, please push for us to really be autonomous. Our authorizer is our local school district. And that's challenging because it's like being a part of a McDonald's territory and we're Wendy's, and they just don't appreciate square patties. They don't like the sea salt on the fries, and they don't like they're not here for none of the lemonade. And so I want to be able to operate my school the way I designed it and be free about that work so that I can realize the promise of our charter. And so that's one. Two, it's very frustrating to continue to apply for funding opportunities, and it seems it's already being earmarked for certain organizations and individuals.
You better say it.
Transparency around how we're funded and given money at the federal level. For example, I know Legends is not the only school who doesn't receive a full Pew Purple allocation. And so for us, that means that we don't have money to provide transportation. So it just feels like we have to scrap and fight for every small win that traditional public schools take for granted. And so for me, putting on the table, we can go back into our neighborhoods and look at the schools that were underperforming 20 years ago, and they're still open. What my ask is for us to go ahead, and the same accountability tool that you're applying to each and every one of us, to apply to every school fairly. The same criteria that will either keep our doors open or shut. Let's go ahead and just apply that across the board uniformly. And let's quit acting like education isn't political. And so for me, I know what I'm about to say may not even be popular among this group, but Democrats have to unify on what school choice means. I am so over hearing certain specific groups talk about moratorium on choice. Everybody doesn't have the money to go and live in a neighborhood that's going to yield you the education you want for your child. But in 2021, Ray, I find it so hard to believe that we as people of color are still putting shade on the choices that parents want to make for their children. In the name of what? For me, that's a problem. And so what conversation has to be had within our community to put that argument to bed? I feel like after 400 years of our ancestors being enslaved, us being behind the economic 8-ball, we should have whatever choice we want, period, full stop. And for our own community to emasculate people's choice, that has to be addressed. And so from the funding, from our community to the service, and then finally, what I would say from a very selfish point of view as a second-year operator in our school, I know that I'm brilliantly talented, and the teachers who are working with our students are also brilliantly talented. And for folks to understand that we're all doing this as a service and act of love, of self-determination and freedom for our communities. And so for us to be treated anything less than lauded and respected, regarded public servants, and instead not the enemy of the people, that has to be addressed and stopped immediately.
So I hear you. And my advice to you, like my first set of advice to you is, I got room in my party. If you want to come and kick it with the Republicans, I got room over here, and we are for school choice. If you don't know, now you know. All right. So Jeff, same question, bro. Like, what are your biggest asks from the charter sector, elected officials, and funders into civic organizations?
I just first want to acknowledge what Tasha said. I think that was very powerful and beautifully put. Then I also want to acknowledge that you gave a shout out to the Republican Party and you're proud of it. So just acknowledge that. I think that's beautiful too. I love seeing that diversity within that. And for me, I think that illuminates one key point, a few key points. But the first one is that there's been a huge shift, and the pandemic has been real, but it's still same old, same old. I was about to curse. I'm a cursor, but I'm trying to control myself. Same old, you know what? But the reality is, more than anything, this calls for the action of us shifting away from being like superhero leaders as individuals, but really think about what collectivism means to actually move the ball forward. Like to go further, we all got to really be in it together and put aside egos and really think about how we can leverage each other or how we can partner in an intentional, strategic way to move the ball for all kids. I'm not satisfied if the East Side is winning or of Indianapolis or if Flatbush is winning in Brooklyn. We want as many of our kids out here as possible winning. I think that's a huge thing for me right now, but I think that's going to take a collective effort. The second thing I just think, as it relates to us being selfish, talking about Indianapolis, we have 70% of our kids are ESL students. We need that guap ASAP. We need the funding, we need the money, we need the support to actually truly give them a fair shot. And I'm tired of like being Black folks We good with the struggle. We make anything out of anything. You give us something, we make it happen. But I think that's to our own detriment. And I think, what would the world be like if we don't make nothing out of nothing? I think there's a point in time where we have to actually, stand strong for like wanting to be in more than survival mode. And I think it's really important that we at least start having a conversation about that, because there's some people that's doing that, because I think that leads to the third point I want to make is around like keeping people in this industry, man. Like at this point in time, we're at the juxtaposition where people are just actually leaving or being burnt out. And it ain't because of the kids, it's because of everything else. So my last call is, how do we keep people in the right positions within the ecosystem to move the ball forward? And I think all too often, a lot of us are at the school-based position, but a lot of decisions made way above that or nowhere near that. Then we need people in there too that are skillful as well. A lot of people are at leadership positions, but their ass need to be teaching or doing something differently, and they need to be there as well. I think the major thing we need to think about, what does talent mean in education? How do we put the right people in the right seats and keep them in those seats, or an adjacent seat that can help move the entire thing forward? And that's where I'm at right now. And I think all too often we're losing out because it's a war on talent and people are burning out and leaving. And we have too many beautiful, strong, bold people that don't want anything to do with it. And I think in order for us to win, it has to be a collective effort in order for our kids to win. So that's where I'm at with it right now.
Thank you for that. Thank you for sharing that. And so, folks, really quick, I just want to put the spotlight on me. I was talking about my political party, and I was talking about my political affiliations. This has nothing to do with the sponsors of the program. This is solely talking about Raymond and Raymond's political affiliations. So I just want to make that clear for anybody that's listening, so that you guys, if you're going to direct heat to me and Tim Scott. All right. So Christy, circling back to you, like what things would you like to see from the community, in terms of the work that you guys are doing?
Yeah, kind of to piggyback off of what the others have already said, is funding. Not just funding from a monetary standpoint, but volunteerism as well. We could always use people within the building to help support students with learning to read, learning to do math. So just volunteering. And then, yeah, that's pretty much it. Volunteering, funding, either donate something, donate books, donate coats, donate food, donate whatever you can donate, because for us, it's really important that kids have the same experiences that more affluent students have. And so something as simple as sponsoring a field trip to the museum, the Children's Museum, or sponsoring a field trip to the skating rink, or, the pumpkin patch and apple orchard. We went to the pumpkin patch and apple orchard, and the kids had a really great experience learning about how apples grow, how to turn them into cider and apple pie and pumpkins and all of that. And we all know that the learning comes alive when they're able to have those hands-on experiences. And so, sponsoring, if you own or, are the CEO of a museum or something where kids can have that experience, it doesn't have to be just straight cash. It could be tickets to see a play, whatever. But yeah, that's pretty much it for me.
Yeah, thank you for that. Right. And so I want to plug National Charter Collaborative. Thank you guys for having us. Right. Thank you guys for creating a space for single site charter schools to talk about some of the things that are occurring that impact the work. And thank you guys for allowing us to showcase the work that's happening in some of these single site charter schools. So Atasha, coming back to you, kind of closing us out, like, what do you want folks to know about single site charter schools, your challenges, your wins? Like, what do you want folks to know?
I want folks to know that this work is rooted in love, truly and honestly, and first and foremost in the promise of our scholars. And so, at least from my experience, Ray, my son attended 9 different schools during his K-12 experience. And it wasn't because he didn't have 2 parents who loved him. He didn't have an IEP or 504, just elevating that to say he didn't go to school with anything but open heart and mind towards school. And it was difficult for him. And for me, understanding that the work that we're doing is to provide choice and opportunity and safe places for our students to learn first and foremost. And so that people understand that this is a selfless act, and that each and every person who works in a single site charter school are making personal sacrifices. We're not doing the same things that our non-school friends do, right? Because our work doesn't end neatly and nicely at 5 p.m. Whether it's, in our case, a water main break, whether it's a parent getting a flat tire, students' parents passing away, and just the reality of being on 24/7. And that tax that you mentioned, Jeff, is real. The same thing. Nobody wants to fight all the time. And so whatever you can do to make this work easy, please consider near and far. If there are sponsors here, what we're asking for is not for our personal benefit. Even as public servants, we're not making bank that's going to retire our families and help our families' generations. We're here as normal, everyday people trying to make a living for our family while serving our communities and our country. And the people who can rally around support, I would ask them to disarm and look at whatever screens you have in place that are preventing you from supporting the work that we're doing, and make that change. Get into a point of action and do it from a selfless point. And if we do that, there's enough room for us to make space for the next generation of future charter operators. But it's going to be about us all collectively putting all of our resources on the table and making it work for everybody, or else we're dead on arrival. And so we have to figure out how to make this thing work as a whole and refocusing what this work is really about.
Thank you for that. Jeff, coming to you, and then Christy coming to you, and then we're gonna close, and then I'll close out.
I mean, I don't think there's much to add besides that, but I think the major thing is love the babies and believe the babies, man. I think at the end of the day, that's where the core is, like, love the babies and don't just love them, truly believe in them. And then I think the next step is after that is like get results for them by any means necessary. And I think all too often, like, people kind of want to love the babies, but when it really comes back to it, people love their sports teams more than they love our kids. The way I see people advocating for LeBron James or for the Jets who haven't won in 30 years, I think we have to have the same mindset that we have for things that don't actually really impact or shape what this country or the future of this country can be. And I think our kids and people that look like us are undervalued. And I think it's important that we maintain our value, but we actually double down to make sure that they get their value as well. And I think that perception and that bad pattern that's in the brains of a lot of people really gets in the way of our kids getting a fair shot to reach their potential. All I'm asking is that they get a fair shot. If they reach it and it's fair, that really puts the control back in their hands. But the truth and the reality is our kids do not get a fair shot to reach their potential at scale. I'm not talking about there's pockets where it's definitely happening. We know we can find those. But at scale, do our kids get a fair shot? And I think that's criminal, and that's unfair, that's unjust, and that's actually pure robbery for what everybody's potential could be.
Yep. Thank you for that. Christy, before we get yanked.
Yeah, I just want to echo what Natasha said. This is a labor of love for us. We are making sacrifices ourselves, sometimes coming out of our own pockets to make sure kids and their families get what they need. This is not about politics or money. We just want to educate kids, like Jeff said, and we want to make sure we do it without taking away the joy of learning, as what happens in traditional schools. We want them to be able to be proud of who they are, and we want to help build them up so that they can be and develop into who they're already created to be. It's just our jobs to help bring it out of them. And so that's it. That's all I have.
Thank you. Hey, listen, this was nothing but love. I appreciate you guys for coming and kicking in with me. Up next, the Fireside Chat with Trailblazers and Innovators, a conversation with Miriam Roca, Executive Director, Bronx Charter School for the Arts, Dr. Howard Fuller, the OG, founder of the Institute for Transformation of Learning at Marquette University, Donald Hintz, founder of Friendship Public Charter School, and Chris Worrell, VP of Development and Advocacy, Oakmont Education, as the moderator. So thank you guys for coming to kick it with us. Shouts to NCC and shouts to Bright Beam for being a sponsor. Thank you guys. You guys have tune in to the next to the next round of talks. It's gonna be amazing. All right. Thank you.
God bless you guys. Thank you so much.
Yeah, much love.
Thank you.
Hello, how are you?
Hello.
It's so good to see you. I think that, hello everybody, how are you? It's just I'm gonna temper myself so I don't get so excited that we don't stay focused. But thank you everybody for joining us. And I just wanna do a quick thanks to the National Charter Collab and to Naomi for really everything and her vision for this UnConference. It has really been awesome. And I'm really looking forward to this panel. And I wish you could ask my family how much I have talked about all of you here. It is just really an honor and a privilege to be here. So I'm Chris Galacy-Worrell. I work with the Freedom Coalition for Public Charter Schools as well as Oakmont Education. And I'm just really privileged to be here. So I'm humbled to be in the presence of these visionary, trailblazing leaders in this education reform space. Joining me today is Miriam Rocca, Donald Hentz, and Dr. Howard Fuller. I want to give a quick bio for each of you, and then we will get right into the fun, which I know everybody is here for. Mr. Hentz is the founder and chairman of the Board of Friendship Public Charter Schools in Washington, D.C. Friendship is one of the largest chartered public schools in the nation's capital, serving more than 4,200 students on 17 campuses. Friendship has the unique distinction of issuing through the District of Columbia's Industrial Revenue Bond Program more than $200 million in bonds to build, purchase, and renovate its schools. Mr. Hentz is the chairman and CEO of the Friendship Education Foundation, and the foundation is currently operating charter schools in Arkansas. Thanks so much for joining us, Mr. Hentz.
Thank you.
Ms. Rocca is a dynamic advocate of education reform with over 20 years of experience leading not-for-profit organizations dedicated to innovation in urban education. Most notably, she is the co-founder of Girls Preparatory Charter School and the Public Prep Network. Ms. Rocca is currently the executive director of Bronx Charter School for the Arts, which is a community-based charter school with a focus on integrative arts. Ms. Rocca is also a founding member of the Black Latinx Asian Charter Collaborative, where she sits on the executive committee with a forward vision for the future of education, alongside National Charter Collab Board of Director member Rafiq. And last but not least, the incomparable Dr. Howard Fuller, better known as the GOAT in our space, who recently retired from Marquette University in Milwaukee. Well, where he is now a distinguished professor emeritus. Prior to his retirement, he was the founder and director of the Institute for the Transformation of Learning, which was founded in 1995 to provide quality education options for students of low-income families. The Institute awarded nearly $36 million in grants from local and national foundations. In addition to 25 years at Marquette University, Dr. Fuller served as superintendent of Milwaukee Public Schools, as well as other numerous leadership roles throughout his esteemed career. His work in the community included serving as the chair of BAO, the Alliance for Choices in Education in Milwaukee, CEO of the Leadership Academy, Milwaukee Collegiate Academy, Quest Milwaukee, and the Charter School Review Committee. The Dr. Howard Fuller Academy, a charter school in Milwaukee, is named in his honor, and he is also a member of the National Charter School Hall of Fame. Thank you all for joining me. Let's get started, and I'd love to start with you, Miriam. Why public charters? Why public charters? That's going to be the question that we kind of start off with. Why public charters?
Yeah, well, thank you. It's an honor to be here, and there's no one better to be here than than Dr. Fuller. Why public charters? I think, our students have had subpar academic institutions as the only thing that they could access for so very long. And with public charters, it was an opportunity I found to sort of look at education in a different way and bring students everything that you would want them to have in a private setting, and in a setting that heretofore was only available to students who attended private schools. So that was definitely what we thought of when we thought of Girls Prep. We used to say it was Spence for sense. Spence is a private, very Tony private school on the Upper East Side in Manhattan, which is an all-girls school. And we're like, well, we want to give the same quality of education to kids downtown in a different setting. And so that was really a lot of the impetus for Girls Prep was, why, especially at the time, it was why should rich kids be the only ones who can have a single sex education? And why if you don't want to go to a parochial school, how do you get that? How do you access that for your child if you think that's what's best for her or ultimately him? So an opportunity to do things differently, things that had never been really done in a public context, was sort of what was the major impetus for me, at least.
Yeah, and if you could expand a little bit, like what the original goal, because the access point, like why, is a little different than what the original goal was for when you started that up. And I'd really love to hear a little bit more about that
Sure.
from everyone as well.
I mean, obviously the goal is to have children able to, fulfill their ultimate purpose in life, right? And have all the opportunities open to them, as opposed to having opportunities shutting as they go through the public school system. And so college and beyond, really wanting them to be able to do whatever it is that they saw as possible for them, was ultimately the goal. But also in a single sex context, it was about being able to give girls initially an education that was really unique to girls, right? Like being able to be in a school with all girls gave a girl the opportunity to be the class clown, the class geek, and the nerd. All of those things were girls. So all of it was available to you. Whereas often, not always, in a co-ed environment, those things are sort of gender defined. And so that was part of what the goal was, just letting these girls be whoever it is that they were naturally and wanted to be. But again, having more and more opportunities opening for children rather than fewer and fewer.
I love that. That is really, really awesome. So thank you for sharing. Mr. Hens, why don't you take it up next, and then we'll go to the GOAT third. So that would be good.
I really don't even feel comfortable speaking before Howard.
I'm with you.
No, you guys don't.
None of us do. None of us do. So this is a safe space. This is a safe space.
That's so bogus. This is a very interesting time to talk about people who started charter schools long ago or were a part of the charter movement long ago. Friendship is celebrating its 25th year. And I'm in the room with Howard Fuller, and we actually got started at a youth conference at Vassar College. Howard and I were the two old people invited to speak. And afterwards, I sat down, and this lady came over to me and she said, "I understand you want to start a charter school." And she introduced herself, and it was Howard's wife, Deborah McGriff. And from there, friendship was born. The struggles were huge. If you could imagine being in Washington, D.C., where every other person had a relative who either worked at DC public school system or worked for DC government. And there you were attempting to start a school where they believed you were taking something from them. Not only did they believe you were taking something from them, they actively tried to stop you. We renovated our school and was all prepared to open. They wouldn't even give us a certificate of occupancy. We got a certificate of occupancy at 15 minutes to 9 that morning. We had already paid for buses to line up at our campuses so that we could take our kids to the park that day, just in case they wouldn't let us in our own buildings. So the struggle to provide a quality education for our children continues. And it is not always people of the other race who are working to prevent you from doing that. We are fighting an institution, and that institution can be led by any race. And that institution is an institution having to do with unions, having to do with the belief that ownership and that everything is going to be all right if we just keep on doing whatever it is we're doing. And if something goes wrong, it's clearly the parents' fault. But here, what we wanted to do, and that is provide an education that was of the same quality as the kids got at Sidwell Friends. This has been repeated 1,000 times. Sidwell Friends, because in DC, that's the school, private school. I think to go there is $40,000, $50,000 a year, some enormous sum of money. But we wanted our kids to have the same thing. And if you go into a friendship school, I absolutely guarantee you, you will see the same thing. And you will see us working very hard to try to make the same level of education, the same type of education available to our children. And I guarantee you our children are not rich, but we treat them as if they are rich. Howard, it's good to see you, buddy.
Yeah, so thanks for that, Mr. Hentz. And now speaking, you talked about the struggle, and now we'll talk about how the struggle continues with Dr. Fuller on why public charters for you, Dr. Fuller.
Yeah, first of all, I wanted to say what a pleasure it is to see Donald and Miriam, and obviously to see you, Chris. It is really an honor and a pleasure for me to be able to be on this panel. I wanted to thank Stevie for the shout out about Malcolm X Liberation University, which is what this really is, and she knows that. So I just want to thank her for the shout out. So Chris, let me approach your question this way. The fact that we are calling charter schools public charter schools is a problem. And I fought against it and I lost. Because I think what is happening and what worries me the most about charter schools, going back to why it was all started, is the longer we exist and the more that we try to prove to people that we're public, the more we're becoming just like the places that we were trying to escape from. And the fact that we gave in, and the we being the movement, the fact that we gave in and had to call ourselves public charter schools because our opponents were saying that we were private. And somehow we thought that if we just put public in front of it, we were going to win that battle, which was stupid to start with because the opponents don't care what we put in front of it or back of it. They're never going to stop fighting to make sure that we don't exist. And so one of the things I hope, Chris, as those of you who are going to fight this battle for the next quarter of a century, I hope that you all will quit giving in to what these people that we pay to tell us how to message. I'm always amazed the amount of money that goes out to people who's supposed to tell us what is the best way to message what you're trying to do. That's bogus to start with. So I just want to make this point, and then, I'm done.
Yeah, I don't believe that.
Because I don't want to, when you get old, people like, you old people are trying to talk about what it used to be like. That's not what I'm trying to do here. What I'm trying to say is the reasons why charter schools came into existence was because the traditional public school system was not well serving a lot of our children. And a lot of those children were poor and disproportionately Black and brown. And so I see Joe Nathan is on here. So it was the people in Minnesota after a speech by the dude who was the head of the AFT, because he actually was the one who put forth this idea of charter schools, although he wanted it to be union run. But it was the people in Minnesota, Joe and Ted and John Schroeder, and then, of course, Ember Reichhoff, who actually put the legislation into the Minnesota legislature and passed the first charter school law. And the theme back then was freedom in exchange for accountability. The idea was to give people the freedom to create new types of public schools to serve children. And we can debate when the first meeting was held. I think it was in Governor Romer's mansion. People will say it was somewhere else. But what I can tell you is from the very beginning, I was raising the question, where are the Black people? Where are the Black people who are going to be able to take this newfound freedom and develop new schools for our children? And as our opponents came at us, what happened is we gave up on the freedom and assumed all of the accountability. And so what is now occurring is people are no longer able to be as free as they should be. Because in order to serve the children that we're trying to serve, we need freedom. We need the ability to be different. It isn't about equality, because as you all know, if we just get equality, we're nowhere. We need equity. And equity is way, way different than equality. Now, I'm a pessimist, because I don't think that Black people are going to get either equality or equity in the United States of America. So what it means is we have to go back and reaffirm that the purpose of charter schools is to, in fact, educate our children. But it is also about solidifying the concept of a self-determination of a people, that we have the right to educate our own children. We have the right to establish institutions that will serve our children. But we'll never be able to do that and serve them well if the same forces and the same people who were in power to maintain the traditional system are the same people who are going to decide for us what we can do or not do.
Wow. Wow. Okay. Well, I mean, expect it. I'm like, I want to hug Dr. Fuller. I'm like wow. I wrote down, we gave up on the freedom and took all the accountability. Like, ouch, a little bit of a reality, which kind of, I'd like to talk a little bit about that, to say, we know that the charter landscape, I'm gonna take that public out. Dr. Fuller, that has been drilled into this brain. You have no idea. Like, I correct the legislature sometimes, like, no, it's a public charter school. Don't forget it. I'm going to have to unlearn that. And I'm about to unlearn it quick. What are you seeing now? Let's think about what you're seeing now in the charter space you didn't see 30 years ago, whether that be positive or negative, because it's a really interesting time right now. So that's kind of the question. We don't need to talk about how it's changed. We know it's changed in some regard and not changed at all in other regards. What are you seeing now that you didn't see then? And what are some feelings around that?
You want to start with me? Well, I mean, now I'm going to switch to the other side of my mind. What I'm seeing are new people coming into. In other words, the movement can't survive if it depends on me and Donald. Obviously, the movement has to bring in new people, with all due respect, new people and new ideas. The problem, Chris, is the further you get away from a revolution, the harder it is to remember why it started in the first place.
Right.
Oh. And so what I'm saying is, what I see that is new and different is a positive. But what I want to urge the new and different people coming in, because everybody comes in with their base of experience, right? Both from theoretical knowledge and practice, right? And so people could not come at this in the same way that Donald and I did, because it's a different moment in history. People are bringing different experiences. And so I'm not suggesting that we need to stay where we were when this all started back in 1991. But what I am suggesting is we need to maintain the fervor that brought about the change. Because the change, as Ted Colery said, the innovation is not charter schools. The innovation is chartering. It is who has the ability to allow for the creation of charter schools. And so what we have to do is go back and again remember, why did this all start in the first place, right? What was the reason for it? And if you lose sight of that, and I think we have to a certain degree, and I understand, because a part of this is, how do you survive over time, right? And so what happens is, in order to institutionalize, you have to set certain things up in place. So the problem is, how do you institutionalize and at the same time remain radical and remain committed to the original purpose? And so my advice, to the extent that it's useful, is to new people who are coming in, you do need to bring in your ideas and your feelings and your fervor, but you can't lose sight of the reason why this was all created in the first place. And you must always stay focused on, this isn't about the latest technology. It ain't about you building your damn brand. It's about building institutions that serve our children and our community.
Perfect.
Yeah. Anybody have anything to? I feel like I'm writing a whole Dr. Fuller quote book. Little paper cup. But there's just
writing it in the chat too. You can see it.
It's really. I think that's really, really insightful about people coming in, new people coming into the space. I'm a middle-aged person, so I'm a little not new to the space. But I'd be interested, Miriam, what are your thoughts on? You haven't been in the 30-year charter game like the two gentlemen here, but I'm really interested in your perspective on this. I think in 20 years, 2 decades of it. I'm interested in what your thoughts are and what you've seen differently, and kind of what Dr. Fuller was just talking about.
Yeah, I think I always think about how many conferences I've gone to over the years when Dr. Fuller would stand on the stage and say, if we don't have more schools led by people of color, this effort, this movement is going to die. And people would say, yeah, and they golf claps. And still to this day, 8%, I think, of charter schools nationally are run by people of color, right? Whereas 90-something% of the kids are people of color. And 1% of the philanthropy comes to schools run by people of color, whereas 99% go to people who are not run by people of color. And I think that recognition and that the fight for equity is what Black has been trying to do. The Black Latin X Asian Charter Collaborative, the Black folks, as I call us, have been really trying to bring that to light, at least in New York City, and say, hold on, this isn't right. This really has to change. And changing it is the way that charter schools will become relevant again. And so my hope is that, and I am seeing that the changes that are happening now are about that equity and about people saying, now hold up, you can't, this doesn't make sense, right? And I think also the legislature in New York saying, we're not gonna lift the cap in New York City rather, unless that is changing. So I think hopefully we're gonna start to see some change in the people who are able to get charters, the people who are able to raise the funds and actually continue to do the work that, to Dr. Fuller's point, is why this whole movement exists, and that's to serve our children and serve them as well as we possibly can.
I'm not quite optimistic about what I see. And I say that in a city where 40% of the kids do attend charters. But what has occurred is that the city, by putting the people it wants on the charter board, have stopped charters from growing, limiting the number of schools that can be started. Because we had done the numbers long time ago and saw that if charters grew at the rate they were growing maybe 10 to 15 years ago, they would have surpassed the traditional public school in terms of size, the number of kids served. But what happened is the various mayors actually interviewed people, and the people that they put on the board had to agree to limit the growth of charter schools. Think about what I'm saying. And if you look at the numbers, people talk about, oh, things are really happening in Washington in terms of education. If you look at the numbers, let's take high school graduation rates. That's traditionally what people look at. When we started charter schools in DC, the graduation rate from the public school system was 49%. Today, all of these decades later, it's 52%. So the growth in high school, in the high school graduation rate in the District of Columbia, is because of charter high schools. Friendship has traditionally had a 95, 96, 97% graduation rate. Okay, that is hugely important. Very little has changed in terms of what is taking place in the traditional school system. But what they did, all of the innovation that Howard talked about, when we started out, and the single, we call them mom and pop charter schools, we had an art school, we had a school for this, but it was, and people sent their children there. It is my firm belief that if you want your child to sing and dance, and there's a school that offers that education, your child should be able to go to that school. But no, we have beat these schools in the ground. And when I say beat them in the ground, I mean beat them in the ground, where it is no longer acceptable to be a single site charter school. And if in fact you try, then they will monitor you out of business. That's a fact, not my speculation. We have got to maintain what Howard talked about, and that is the vision of why we started. What was it really like? Because you will see that behind all of this, very little has changed. Very little. We have changed because in way too many instances, we have allowed ourselves to be co-opted. I was told early on when you talked about resources, Miriam, and our schools not getting the resource. I was told early on, Friendship is not going to get any money, so don't expect any. That's what I was told. And Howard knows the people who made those kinds of statements to him too. Mm. And what we did, we always tried to maintain financial stability and financial integrity, because we know you're coming. I've had city council people say, "Oh, don't let Donald Hintz have a building," as if I could have the building. Don't let Donald Hintz have a building because he's going to turn them into condos. And if you live in Washington, practically every single school building that the city maintained control of has been turned into a condo.
Mm.
One or two have been given over to schools. The rest are condos. Understand me? We cannot give up the fight. We cannot be co-opted. Yes, Howard and I are moving off of the scene, but I guarantee you, every time you need a voice, they trot us out because we have not forgotten why and how we got started in this business is for our children. They need a better life than what they have been getting. I'm through.
I don't think you or Dr. Fuller are exiting any scene anytime soon from I think the historical context of the space is so critically important. And I can say from myself, being fortunate to have been looped into Dr. Fuller's universe and know and have been to the conferences where I've seen Dr. Fuller for so long, I feel like you're absolutely correct in the fact that so many people are missing that large piece of the why. And so maybe before we kind of move on to the next question, and hopefully we can get Dr. Fuller back, is, so how do we better get that information and take that historical context and disseminate it without always having to be like, Dr. Fuller, I need you here. Oh, Donald, I need you here. Or, hey, I need you here. Hey, how do we best mobilize ourselves to be good stewards of that history and to keep moving it forward?
Well, for the first time, the charter schools in DC have actually formed a good alliance, and almost all of the schools have decided to join. So think about what I'm saying. Before, the charter schools going unnamed refused to join. So the Charter School Association, as it was called, was termed the Association for Black-Run Schools. But now, I think there has been sufficient growth that the other schools have decided to be a part of this. And I think that is a movement. If you don't have a strong voice, then you have nothing, because they will divide us. And they will always divide us by race and resources. That is a fact. But now, hopefully, we will stick together long enough to prevent the onslaught from our new liberal city council.
Yeah, I think the same thing is what's happening with Black, in that we're trying to we have come together as a group of independent charter schools run by people of color, and we are fighting to have a voice, or to make our voice heard in the New York City space, and then beyond that, partnering with other like-minded organizations to make sure that perspective, that is our history, that is why we're doing this work, is out there and is shared, and that people are hearing it loud and clear.
Yeah, I appreciate that, and thank you. And I just wanted to quickly say, Dr. Fuller is working on coming back, but I think that this sets us up to talk a little bit about education. Has never really been, in my opinion, the faint of heart of any sort. And especially now, and I've been in this public chartering space since 2001, 2-ish, in different ways. So not like a founder, but I was actually filing in a charter school at that point. But I think about the climate right now. We talked about, we've seen a lot of education transfer itself right into the center of every conversation, right or wrong, in every household, in every community, in every business. I've actually had very strange, casual conversations with strangers waiting for things about education, and my brain does a million explosions when it's happening because I'm like, wow. So given the current climate, attention and polarization, we are getting it from everywhere. What do you think is at stake? And what, with regards to chartering charter schools, because we have, the left side of the aisle coming for charters in many respects with the teachers union and other modalities. And then we have the other side polarizing with regards to critical race theory, all of those things that are not, it is what it is. I mean, people are using the word, it's not what it is, but it is, especially here where I live in Ohio, and we have seen I like to call it an algae bloom, because those kill people, and they're unassuming. And so the algae bloom has made it here all over, and I'm watching on both sides thinking, how do our families and communities fare when we are literally, it's incoming from all sides? And there's we are trying to how do we get, what is your perspective on this and where we are? Because it's wild to me, and I'm really looking forward to hearing.
You want to start me, or you want me to
Please,
start?
go right ahead.
Let's do it.
Let me just briefly talk. I was away for the weekend, and my neighbor came across the street, and we stood in the streets and talked, and he started about do you teach critical race theory in your schools? First thing out of his mouth. And so what you now have is a group of semi-fundamentalists who have now seen a way to kill curriculum, to squash teaching, to squash history and rewrite it. And if you've ever read a history book in Texas, you know exactly what I'm talking about. And so they are now blaming who? Well, it is the schools, and parents need to take over the schools. All I need is a group of parents to come and take over the curriculum of a school, any school. And it will be exactly as it was the last 18 months. We will never, ever hear someone say, your job is easy, because COVID killed that statement. Let me tell you, people calling saying, I don't know how to turn on the computer. Where do I plug the Chromebook? Right. So teaching really isn't easy. And they've learned that. So as soon as we get over that, and hopefully things would be smoother, critical race theory comes up. All of this because a lady fought for her tenure that she rightfully deserved, and said, I don't want to be where you are because you refuse to treat me equally. And my credentials say I am this. That's what we have.
I don't know the answer to the question. I think I'm so glad Dr. Fuller got back online for this part of the question.
Howard is a radical.
I really don't know. He is. He's gonna blow it up. But I do think that there's huge value in looking to history and saying this is what we do in America, right? We make a step forward and then they try to wipe it away. And so what's happening now has happened in history, and that, you know, trying to erase the history that we're all finally learning about is exactly what they do, right? So I think there's something in making sure that people understand the history, the people that will listen, right? Because the people who won't listen are not going to listen, but trying to make sure people understand this is cyclical. This is what happens. They try to wipe away the history so we don't know it. And then we can't share it and we can't build on it. But I am dying to hear what Dr. Fuller has to say about critical race theory in elementary schools. Go ahead, sorry.
So Dr. Fuller, can you hear me good? You hear me well? I think we might have tech issues. So we'll try to get that fixed because Dr. Fuller's not going to get out of talking about this issue. We're not going to get out of this. Nice try with the audio. It's not going to work. We're going to get that audio back. So while we're waiting on that, let's talk a little bit about advice, because we've talked about the history and the importance of the history and the context, and sharing that. I mean, that's kind of part of, I know the culture I grew up in was all historical, from my abuela to my mother, and passing on things from my family, from when they were in Cuba, from here. And that is, I have the stories from my abuela's childhood it's been passed down to me. And I have that history to move forward. So we're talking about, you know, the value of that. What is your advice moving forward for new and future leaders of color in the space? What are the, you know, you make a list, like these are the things to watch for, the exciting, beautiful things, and the traps in the bottom of the floor that you didn't see coming. What are those spaces? Like, what would that look like for you?
I think one of the things that's really important for people to do as new people of color in this space is to surround themselves with people who are also of color and like-minded in the space. Because I think one of the things that has been so hard and painful for many of us is just the isolation of this work, right? The fact that, you know, if you're not in a big CMO, you don't have colleagues necessarily who are close to you and something you're going through.
I had technical problems, so I missed the.
Oh, hold on a second, Dr. Fuller. I can't. Hold on. Uh-oh. They put it. I'm Gen X. I'm not tech savvy. I apologize.
Yeah, that's all I was going to really say. Like, just it's a very isolating job running a charter school, and being in this work with other colleagues who are like-minded, I think is really hugely important and gives you so much comfort and strength and brotherhood and sisterhood.
I can hear you though.
As you go into work that is on a good day hard and you know, harder and harder every day. And yeah, that would be my biggest hope, is that people find a way to surround themselves with people who give them hope and comfort and brotherhood.
I think that's beautiful. And I think that it's important to have people that help lift us in times when we feel very isolated and alone, and help gas us up so that we can, you know, top off that tank and then radically go forward, spreading the history. You know, that's what we need. So yeah, I really appreciate that. Really appreciate that.
Howard? No.
Do we got you back, Dr. Fuller?
Well, at least he's smiling.
I heard him.
I heard him.
I did too.
It was like omnipotent. He just started like speaking. I was like, Oz? Where are we? Okay, well, Donald, while we're trying to get Dr. Fuller back, what is, I know you've got a deep well to dig into for advice. So,
to be honest, you really do need to spend more time exchanging ideas, regardless of our having a serious need to understand our history. What we cannot do is let our history cripple us. And so we have got to be out there and bringing ourselves together and exchanging the very finest ideas that we have. We cannot continue in the 21st or 20, what is this, the 21st century or 22nd? I don't know.
I think the 22nd now, because I feel like we've been saying the 21st for too long.
And so we can.
It is the 21st. I've hopped ahead 100 years.
I agree. But we can't wallow in that history. Okay. Our kids need to succeed in this century for the years to come. And we cannot do it providing a second-class education to them. My 13-year-old grandson is teaching coding to Stanford University students. Do you understand me?
Wow.
We can't hold on to the past and grip it and choke it. We have got to use it as a base for how we act, but we have got to grow.
And growing is painful.
It is painful.
So I feel like I'm going to need a nice like cleansing cry and then a movement forward. That's like kind of how it goes. It's a deep cry and then a run forward into the Kool-Aid man. So, Dr. Fuller, now that we have you back, you're going to have to maybe try to catch up on 2 questions, but I really want your insight. And let's start with the question that we're on right now for continuity's sake, which is what's your advice to the next kind of up and coming generation of fighters, warriors, leaders in space?
Chris, I always find it difficult to answer that question, and let me explain why. Frantz Fanon wrote a book called Wretched of the Earth. And in this book, he said that every generation out of relative obscurity must discover its mission and either fulfill it or betray it. And so what I've always taken from that is that each generation has to define for itself how it sees the oppression that is in front of them. They then have to determine, given that oppression and given the tools that are available to them, how are they going to fight? So when people ask me for advice, the only advice I have is you need to figure out what you see as the nature of your oppression. And then you need to figure out how to use Snapchat, TikTok, Facebook, Twitch, whatever it is. You need to figure out how do you use those tools to fight. And then you have to make sure that you decide what's real and what's not. And what I mean by that is if you determine that the way to make progress is to get 1,600 likes on your Instagram page and that's going to move the struggle forward, then God bless you. I'm still living in a world that says that's all interesting, but the number of likes that you get don't necessarily end the oppression of a people. It may give you a nice level of satisfaction, but it doesn't change the nature of our people's suffering. Or maybe it does. but I don't know that because I look at it from a totally different lens. I think the point I'm trying to make here, Chris, is that I'm very reluctant to start telling younger people what they ought to be doing, because I think that the historical circumstances that they face are different than the historical circumstances that I face. But I do think that there are some givens. And one of the givens is that race in America is permanent. And that if, in fact, you're going to become anti-racist, then it ain't going to change in a week. And it ain't going to change because you got 1,400 likes on your Instagram page. It's going to change. I don't think it's ever going to change, personally. I think this country is always going to be racist. And I take this from Derek Bell's book, Faces at the Bottom of the Well. And so people heard me say this over and over again, that I get up every day as a pessimist, because I don't think that racism is going to be eliminated in America. But I do have to get up and fight it in any event, because if I don't get up and fight it, then it says that I'm co-signing on this existence. And so for me, the struggle is about moving our people forward at the moment in history in which you live. And those of you who are going to give leadership during this period, you've got to define like what that's going to look like. I mean, Donald and I sort of went at it in the period that we were most active, right? And we tried to determine based on our best judgment what was the way forward. I think the generation and the generation behind you, there's 2 or 3 different generations now that have got to determine how they're going to fight in this moment. And so again, I'm real hesitant to say you need to do this, you need to do that. I think the first thing you need to do as a general point of view is that you need to do. In other words, I hear people talk about, we just had some courageous conversations. I don't know what the hell that even means. I mean, because the point is, after you get through with a courageous conversation, what you gonna do? What is it that you're gonna do based on that courageous conversation? What change are you gonna get out and fight for? And I can't determine that. You all need to determine that.
Whew. I mean, there's not a lot of follow-up for that one.
I heard the thing about critical race theory, though.
So yeah, Dr. Fuller, we talked a little bit about the onslaught from both sides here, where we're getting a kind of, we have our regular attacks from the teachers union, but now we have an interesting onslaught from our traditionally supportive base. So people that traditionally support.
First of all, I think that whole discussion is a trap. And let me explain what I mean by that. Several years ago, it was multiculturalism. At another point in time, it was something else. And the reason why it's always going to be something else is because at the base of it is sustaining white supremacy. And so the discussion about critical race theory right now for white people is all about turning out white people in the election because it's not even a dog whistle. It's a straight up message that by 2044, white people are no longer going to be the majority in this country. So what's happening is these hordes of black people and brown people and all these gays and lesbians, all these people, they're trying to take over, quote, our country. And so what's happening is critical race theory is to a large degree a straw man or straw woman, whatever terminology you want to use. And let me explain what I mean by that. Number one, most people don't know what the hell they're talking about when they even talk about critical race theory. They don't know the history of it. They don't know what it means. They just mouthing terminology. Because if you know about critical race theory, you know it actually began with critical legal theory. Because what was happening was a group of lawyers, all white for the most part, until people like Derek Bell intervened. The discussion was that you all are dealing with law as if it is some objective truth, void of who had the power to determine the truth. And so when people like Derek Bell began to look at it, they said the same thing about race. that race is being dealt with is if there's some historical, what do I want to say, historical realities to its existence as determined by those people in power. So the reason why you even got into a study of our history in that regard was trying to say, you need to know about what contributions you made to the development of the history of this country and the history of the world. And so if you talk to Gloria Ladison Billings, as I have, about critical race theory, she said, Howard, I actually thought that this was going to be a debate at the graduate school level. I never knew that it was going to be what it is. And she began to talk about Lonnie Guinier's role in this. You know, when she was talking about proportionate representation, when you're a minority in a majority country, and how Clinton and all of them jumped on her, that this is a whole part of this whole history of, quote, critical race theory. And so what Gloria said to me is what I would pass on to y'all. If y'all really want to teach critical race theory, teach our kids how to read, write, think, analyze, and compute. Because if they can read and write and think and analyze and compute, they can begin to think deeply about how do they engage in the practice of freedom. And so if somebody asks me, are y'all teaching critical race theory at our school? Our answer is no, we don't teach critical race theory at our school. What we teach is the role of our children in the history of this country. And Donald is right, and all of you are right. People have used critical race theory to pass laws to try to prevent people from teaching about the real history of this country. So you know what we have to do? We have to become guerrillas. And you know what guerrillas do? Guerrillas, they don't engage in frontal assault on an enemy because they can't fight that enemy because the enemy is more powerful than they are. So what they do is that they hit them here, hit them there. It's like Muhammad Ali. You got to stick and move. And so for me, this is what we're going to have to do during this period. You're going to have to stick and move. No, we don't teach critical race theory, but we do teach history, and we do make sure that Black people understand their role in the history of this country. And we're going to continue to teach that. And we can build that into these standards that y'all have set up. And no, we're not telling white people that they should feel bad because their grandfather was a racist. No, what we're telling them is we need to change all of these laws and stuff that your grandfather developed that we all got to live with. You see what I'm saying? But what's happening is we've fallen into the trap of discussing this at the level that our opponents have defined it, instead of us defining for ourselves how we're going to attack this problem. And I have a lot more to say about that. And I know I'm not always with where some people are on this. You know what I'm saying? But I was in Birmingham, Alabama to give a speech, first one I've given in a while, about 3 or 4 weeks ago. And a lady asked me, what should I do with people who say they want to talk about funding our school, but they don't want to talk about critical race theory? I said, talk about funding your school. You ain't got to insist. If somebody says I don't want to talk about critical race theory, that ain't the only thing in the world we can talk about. What do you want to talk about? Tell me what it is you want to discuss that's going to help the children at my school. Are you prepared to help us fund this? Are you prepared to do this, this, and this? You are? Cool. One last thing, and Donald will appreciate this, and other people might as well. You know, back in the day when the Hampton-Tuskegee model was developed, and the funders used to come down to the schools to see if the Negroes were staying true to what the Hampton-Tuskegee model was. Well, when the funders came around, the people would put up all the pictures and stuff that would show the Hampton-Tuskegee model, and we're doing it, and they were satisfied. As soon as they left, people took that stuff down and did what they needed to do to help our people at that moment. You see what I'm saying? That's how guerrillas engage in struggle. That's how we have moved our people forward historically. So, but anyway, that's my comment on it.
Guerrilla
Wow.
I haven't been thinking about that.
Guerrilla warfare. You know, I know a little bit about that in Cuba. I don't know. I know. So yeah, Dr. Fuller, Donald, Miriam, this has been, I feel like this actually, there has been so much feedback, like just keep going. Like people are like, Dr. Fuller, Donald, Miriam, like I feel like this, there almost is, I would love a historical context conversation to continue. But we do have a stop. I want to say, you know, I'll give you guys each a last moment here to share anything. Charter.
I just want to say one last thing. It's wonderful to see Donald and Miriam and Donald. You know, I love Donald, and people need to know the role that he has played in advancing the idea that there can be a Black-led institution, because Donald probably has the largest Black-led charter school network in the country. And the reason why I think he was able to get there, in addition to his own ingenuity and the help from a whole bunch of people, was that he started from Friendship House, right? That he started from a deep relationship with the community. And that point that he made about this movement will not survive if the only people that can run schools are going to be those people who have these networks. That there still has to be room in this movement for single site charter schools that only want to serve a community that they're in. They don't want to run 50 schools. They don't want to become a network. And I've said this over and over again, that if you're going to serve our people, we have to be able to make sure that there's room in this movement for single site schools led by people who live in those communities and want to serve those children.
Yes.
Dr. Hens.
You said yes.
Well, more than anything, I hope that we fight for our children. I become discouraged watching the news and reading the paper and whatnot, that we seem not to be out there fighting for the children, but we're fighting for systems. We're fighting for too much institutionalism and not enough direct impact on the children whose lives we're trying to save. We can't continue like this. If you want to be popular, you probably are doing the wrong thing. That I really want you to remember. If you want to be popular, you are probably doing the wrong thing. I was told many times, many things, much of it was an attempt to discourage me, but I knew I would never be on anyone's A list. Never. I would never be invited to the party. And remember, if you've been invited to the party, you have been co-opted. Okay.
Fair enough. I think the only thing I would say, and it's been said before, is just that this is the fight of our time. It's sad that it's the same fight, but that is where we are, and we have to sort of gird our loins and get in it and keep going forward and take care of one another at the same time.
Good to see you, Howard.
Hey, good to see you, Marion. Good to see you, Donald.
Good to see you guys.
And
Thank you guys so much.
Thanks for everything.
Thank you guys so much. And thanks to the National Charter Collab and Naomi. And I'm going to think about, if you've been invited to the party, you've been co-opted as I go to sleep tonight. So
it depends on which party it is.
Yeah, some parties are good. And I want to say, Dr. Hens, I think you're on Dr. Fuller's A-list and my A-list and a lot of people's A-list. So I wouldn't really, there's some really cool A-lists out there. And some parties that aren't publicized that are fun to be invited to. So thanks again, guys. This was just really beautiful. And I'm hoping that there's more we can do to bring the history back into focus and to get it down with some guerrilla warfare. So I'm ready. Thanks so much, guys.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, I have had, I've been writing vigorously. I've been trying to tweet. I've been trying to do all the things to like capture every mic drop moment that just happened. To say thank you to the previous panel would not be enough. To say thank you and to show gratitude and appreciation for the new school leaders who are doing this work and doing it alone would not be enough. And today, it is always an honor to bring not only the pioneers who are new to the work, but to remember how we got here. And I literally am like, I don't want to get invited to any more parties. I don't know about y'all. So with that, I'm going to move us along really quickly and briefly to something special I wanted to make sure that we did for not only the leaders in the schools and the students in the communities, but to make sure that we are really doubling down on supporting the people who make the work happen day to day. The unsung heroes of the work that happens in schools, specifically schools that are single site, that have to show up as not only the educators, but also the extended family of the students they serve. The leaders would not be able to do their work without the important people who make that work happen every day. So it's with a great honor that we acknowledge the 2021 National Charter Collaborative Unsung Heroes today at our very first UnConference. So luckily and thankfully, both of this year's heroes hail from the state of Indiana. Two of our leaders, both men who are doing this work, one who has been doing the work much longer, nominated women who have been the backbone and have been the glue of their work every day. So Kimberly Dickerson, who is the front office assistant at Promise Prep, and Adele Romo, the office manager for Vanguard Collegiate. These two women have just shown up and shown out in ways that are unspeakable. So Kim, I'll start with her, has been a pillar to the Promise Prep ND team. As the school navigated opening their doors, she stepped in as single site, as most single site staffs have to. She filled in gaps that needed to be met. Not only handling the front office work, she led transportation and the logistics that go into that. She taught second grade ELA because she wants kids to have the best instruction. And she's been a true team player and has had the kids at the center of her work every single day. So Kimberly, thank you from the NCC team and family, from your team and family at Promise Prep, and on behalf of the students that you serve. Let her work be an inspiration to what happens every day in the schools that NCC works with. Our next awardee is Ms. Romo. She is the office manager for Vanguard Collegiate of Indianapolis, and she has been in that role since 2018. So luckily, she had a little bit of runway before the pandemic hit. So not only has she been a key contributor to the team, she has been doing all of this while juggling her own home life and her own commitment to scholarship leadership, civic engagement, and public service. So during the pandemic, Ms. Romo led the charge to service families and those connected to the school community who are most vulnerable. She worked with their food service partner, Patachou Foundation, to ensure their families were able to receive healthy breakfasts and lunches while school was virtual. She delivered food for those who didn't have transportation. She called families when students missed class. She performed wellness checks for families impacted by COVID-19 and even helped families schedule testing and vaccinations. She worked with school administrators to deliver laptops and Wi-Fi hotspots to families with technology issues. So her connection to the families at Vanguard has allowed for them to create a benevolence fund to support all of the needs that the families have. She leads with vision, humility, and a focus on scholars first. Her work before the pandemic and during the pandemic has been one of the key drivers for the school's success. So, Ms. Romo, thank you for being the glue that holds Vanguard Collegiate together. Okay, well, I am overwhelmed and again, so thankful for all that has been poured into us today by these amazing leaders. Again, the vanguards, the people that decide to take this work into their own hands. So I'm going to give a little bit more about NCC and make sure that we can acknowledge not only the work that we do day to day, but that we are also meeting the 30th anniversary of the first charter law, but the 5th anniversary of this organization. So of course, the National Charter Collaborative is a nonprofit organization focused on supporting single-site charter leaders of color. We know that based on what Dr. Fuller said, what some of what Natasha James said, that these schools do not receive the same support, funding, or any of the resources that are necessary for them to operate day in and day out. Kim and Trish, our founders, were able to come together during their Bahara experience to develop this amazing network of schools. I would raise a glass, but I, of course, have been too nervous to find wine or champagne. But I'm so thankful for the work that they put into making sure that we are able to, one, support, two, think about the supply of new leaders, think about the strengthening of those leaders through our Manati Fellowship, which you'll hear more about. And then how do we sustain the leadership that is here within the work? So as the only network focused on charter leaders of color who run single-site charter schools, we are committed to making sure that the work of these leaders is amplified to make sure that we know that they are the experts and are able to pave the way for more people to create and sustain quality schools that reflect the cultural fabric of our communities. So I believe I have special guests that will be joining me, I think. So I will pause there and just thank you all for making sure that we were able to have a robust conversation, that this feels like a discussion, you know, at a conference, but afterwards, that part of the discussion that happens at the bar later on. And I'm excited to be joined by Kim and Trish, Trish DeZico and Kim Smith, who have poured into this work over the last 5 years. They were able to pass the baton over to me earlier this year, and it has been a tremendous responsibility, but a joy to do day in and day out. I am going to make sure that you know more about the Manati Fellowship, and we are going to cut to that so you can hear more about the leaders and the people doing transformational work.
really good to be around established leaders of color because I've never had that experience before. And to hear their passion and to hear their ideas and to hear how strong and committed they were. And so I found myself learning a lot, just listening to them and just sharing my like personal journey and being vulnerable and having a safe space enough to be vulnerable around some of, you know, my areas of growth.
I'm not sure how you picked us, but I think it was an eclectic mix in a way. But I think the range of experiences was very helpful for all of us. And I believe that there's wisdom and to be offered at every generation.
The Menotti Fellowship with the training, the coaching, the collaboration, the support, and that family all feel that it's a safe place that I could really go to. I'm very grateful for the Menotti Fellowship Program.
Menotti has really, for me, is helped to recenter me to the core of who I am as a person, a spiritual being. It has helped recenter me to the core of why I started in this work and what my purpose on this earth is. And most importantly, and I say this with all humility, it's helped to convict me. Like we all need messages that cause conviction.
So you are in the Menotti Fellowship where you are being micro-affirmed all the time. And no one ever used that terminology. No one ever, but this really safe environment was created where we could come in as we are and discuss issues as they occur and get support.
One of the things that Menotti gave me was that affirmation. And so it's like, it's one of those things like, you have it, but you kind of don't want to say it out loud. And Menotti just said, open the door and said, go ahead and say it. And so when you say that out loud and you say, this is who we are, and this is how we're addressing the needs of our children, it was freeing to me, and I find it freeing to our staff because what they're doing is different from how it was when I first came.
The only last thing I would say is there's power in like-minded individuals, and there's power in like-minded individuals pursuing a noble, humane, and divine purpose. And there's nothing more noble, humane, and divine than how we care for our children. And that's our responsibility, how we care for our children.
It really is.
It would be helpful if I unmuted myself. Thank you, Kim. Because I don't have a Naomi to help me do that. So we are excited to relaunch Menotti in 2022 to think about what are all of the other cities, the other places, the other leaders that we can micro-affirm. But special thanks to all of the leaders who participated in the inaugural cohort in Washington, D.C., where most of you know I served as an authorizer up until this year. And knowing that the work that they were able to put into participating in the Menotti Fellowship was able to sustain them through the onset of the pandemic, and knowing that those relationships will remain intact is the most important part of the network that Kim and Trish, who have joined me, were so thoughtful in creating. So Trish and Kim, I'm not going to interview you, but I am going to pose a couple of questions. You know, of course, this is rooted in building community, but it also was rooted in the disproportionate number of closures that were happening for schools led by people of color. I unfortunately have had to vote to close schools led by people of color, and for various reasons. But your own experience in leading a school, developing a school, and being a board member for a school and board chair for a school, really were the impetus for why you wanted to do this work. What is it that you want to see for the next 5 years of NCC?
Well, first of all, I want to show you, I am raising a glass. So I got mine right here. And so I'll have a little sip for you, Naomi.
As you should,
And cheers to you. I mean, I think that, you know, we couldn't pass 5 years without leadership, right? And you stepping into the leadership. And so thank you so much for what you've been able to bring to this organization, the energy you're bringing, the flavor of this UnConference. I'm kind of digging. I was on earlier and watching folks and seeing. So thank you for that. You know, I think for me, you know, we were able to move the work forward, but you know, we didn't fully realize the promise of the Charter Collaborative, and I think there's a lot that that you've already defined and are designing that I think is going to be really powerful for this organization. I think that in 5 years from now, you know, I would love to see the Charter Collaborative have just a plethora of demonstrations of how the advocacy, the leader support, the ability to start new schools, the ability to define kind of a student-centered way of looking at what thriving looks like. Like in my mind, the Charter Collaborative is best positioned because working with the leaders across the country, when Trish and I were in the midst of it, we would sit at tables with these folks talking about what they're doing. And it was clear that the work that these leaders are doing is just wholly different, and it just wraps around Black and brown children in a way that is just so powerful. And it was so great to see that video of our minority leaders. It just brought back so many memories. So my hope is that there's just you know, several things that we can push on that will, at a national level, make it clear the value of having these types of leaders running schools across the country.
Yeah, I would agree with all of that, and say that I hope that every single site is a member of the Charter Collaborative, and that anybody who wants to start a school, that the collaborative is in a place that's the first place you go to get resources, to have networks. Sorry about the noise behind me. I'm at a conference in this beautiful gallery in Seattle that's built for women. It's called The Wonder of Women. It's built for Black women. And so being in this space all day and then coming on this, I mean, it's all just kind of pulling together. But I really would hope that the collaborative is also a voice for every single charter school out there that's led by people of color.
Well, thank you both. Kim, because you have your glass, and Trish, we will toast in our minds. We had the opportunity to spend the last day and a half together. Our board retreat just concluded yesterday, and knowing and digging deeply with people who are committed to growing this organization, growing the organization specifically to serve leaders who are committed to serving their communities, is just the fuel, as Chris said, that we need to move forward. So Donald Hintz, Dr. Fuller, Miriam, know that the baton is being passed to people who are deeply committed to this work and making sure that we keep students, children, families, communities at the center of what it is that we do every day, but that we affirm them, and NCC will micro-affirm the leaders who are doing that work. So I will raise this Topo Chico, even though you're not supposed to toast with water, to thank you, Kim and Trish, for your vision, and to 5 more years and beyond for the National Charter Collaborative, and to see more charters of leader come into the charter space. So thank you, ladies, and thank you all for joining us today for the UnConference.
All right. Thank you. All of you enjoy the UnConference.
Congratulations, y'all.